Osti UK badai ko Nabraj sanga kura ali hello to say hello. Tara mole so yo invitation aja ko seminar talk ganu sakinsa so they go wale la okay more try gashu climate change. How do we say? Hawa pani paribatan or namshi kyurba. In Tibetan, namshi kyurba. Yes, you agree?
Yes.
Something like this.
Yes. Yes.
So there are some terms, there's some phrases, some idiom which are used to refer to climate change. But I would like to dig out the aesthetic, you might say, the construction, the cultural construction of climate from a deeper cultural point of view. And there's one translation I made from the French, who's a scholar called anthropologist called Philippe Descola. He works originally in South America, in Ecuador, in the Amazon jungle area, and he's from all the anthropologists, he's probably made the biggest comparative project to think about indigenous points of view, traditional state religious points of view, modern scientific rational points of view, and also what he calls totemic, which is sort of the Australian idea of relation between people and the non-human. This is something which is so different across all the cultures. So this is the translation I've made. Okay, the quotes: the Western conceptualization of a nature conceived as an exterior totality which can be exploited is the least shared thing in the world. That's quite a lot going on in there. This is a very dense philosophical statement that we're all very different in our collective cultural disposition for understanding the non-human world. And he's emphasizing there especially the exploitability, this idea of nature as resource. This is something that he wants to bring out, rather than assume everybody can understand the world out there as something to be exploited. So what would be the different points of view that we can talk about? And I've been influenced by Descola and other writers around his group of influence, some of which, a lot of which were talking about shamanism. And it made me think, well, shamanism, in the Taman culture we have bombo. And what is the thing of what does the bombo tell us about relation between human and non-human? Okay, and that is somehow in conversation with maybe what the Lama is saying. But it's more different from what the Hindu religion and state conception is doing as well. So already in Nepal we have a lot of diversity. Within the village we have different alternatives. We have Lama and Bombo. You might also say there's Laben or Lambu. It depends on which tradition there is. But we already have a variety of ways of thinking of human and non-human relation. Idea of carbon representing climate change as something that can be measurable through carbon emissions, calculated by scientific, quantitative approach. It's privileging one kind of way of knowing, the mathematical way of knowing. It's very interesting, but it's not the whole story, is it? It's very interesting to have these figures, but we need to think about the effects of being dependent on these kinds of figures for thinking how we relate ourselves and in our communities to problems of environmental change. And this is what the figures can't do. The quantitative approach can make us think and make us say, oh, that's interesting. But how do we understand this thing collectively? And what does it mean for us? How can we respond? How can we talk about it in words, in ways that mean something to us and our communities? And how can we reflect on climate change as something which we can bring some ancestral knowledge to as well, and other ways of knowing beyond the statistics? But global warming, I remember when I first started teaching this, and one of the students says, yes, it's big, it's scary, but it's also distant. It's a way out there. So it's a kind of exaggerated example of what Descola was talking about, this external totality. It kind of sums up the external totality as something far away. But then, not long after I wrote this, things started happening in UK. We had a flooding. The town I live in, it has very steep sides, yeah? So the rain came down very fast, and the top of the hills are not well managed to hold the water at the top. They've made the water come faster off, because then they go shooting for the birds, the grouse shooting, which rich people pay lots of money for, to shoot the grouse, and the grouse likes to eat the heather, and for that they cut channel so that the water goes away, so that the heather becomes bigger, so there'll be more birds that the rich people can shoot. And as a consequence, I think we had 3 events of flooding, which should have happened maybe one only every 100 years, and instead we had 3 in 10 years, and we were on the national TV, because our little town Todmorden got so flooded with all this rain coming in. So it's big, distant, scary, but it's not so distant now. In the UK as well, we have, just this year, 3 times we have heat wave. We have nearly record temperatures coming in. It's coming closer and closer to us. So what does it mean close up? How do we respond to it close up? So the fundamental approach to the non-human world has been one: can we manage things? Can we stay as humans in control? Can we? So there's a logic. There's a way of thinking that, oh yes, no, okay, we have this information here about the rainfall. We have this information here about other aspects of people's lives and use of the environment, and the idea that it can be rationally managed seems to be put to the question now. It's being pushed very far to the edge. So the managerial logic of governing the non-human world is in question. But it was at the same time, it was the way of converting all this potential change into monetary figures and what loss could happen was very clearly laid out in Lord Stern. He pointed out that this was 20 years ago, in 2006, if we act now, we can end up, we could spend less money than if we start doing things about climate change later on. So by deferring any action, it's going to cost more money. So he's trying to relate it into financial consequences, which we would all have to share. But again, it's one way of communicating the potential threat that's going on, but as I say, it's only one way, and I think it's missing a more rounded comparative framework. Now, here's where it connects with Nabaraj's title that he gave me a bit more. So this is the book that came out in 2013, which summarized my research in Rasua, especially the relations of the villagers with the Langtang Rastyunikunza. And I was inspired by the work of Descola and other writers there to explore these ontologies, these ways of being and ways of relating. I think that's roughly how we understand ontologies. It's not just epistemology. It's not just how we know things, but how we relate and how we are, how we act. Song that I learnt from Rasua, which the people were singing on the way to Gozagund Yatra. And it was Yangna Yambu Make, Yangna Kerong Make, Barki Salakena, Tom Tom Reri Chungsom. So the people, they were not born in Kathmandu, not born in Kerong. They're born in between, in this middle ground. Not in the city, not in the fine, rich, affluent places, but up there in this middle ground between more celebrated locations, and from this weak, unclothed and hungry, so neglected, underdeveloped, in a state of scarcity and shortage and abandonment. So that was one of the influential forms of understanding that I learned when I was in Rasua. And this idea of zomia was put around from about 20 years ago now to discuss the ways in which many indigenous people from the Himalaya region right through into Southeast Asia have stayed apart from the states and the agrarian states with organized forms of agriculture, growing surplus to support state systems, the economy, the language, the social structure of the people like Tamang who are speaking different Tibeto-Burman languages and whose economy is not the same as having Ket, is it? No, you have to have Bari, you have to do a bit of Korea, you have to do a bit of trade, you have to have animals. It's a much more mixed kind of thing. It's not depending on rice in the way that state systems with lowlands can organize themselves in that way. So at the remove, and this idea of zomia was very interesting, that was taken up by the political scientist James Scott in his book called The Art of Not Being Governed. Not being governed. So at a distance from state systems, and in fact not being primitive, backward, but often deliberately choosing to stay apart from the state. And he made some comparison also with earlier in Europe as well. There was the big the Prussian Empire in Germany, there was Rome, and then there were these other places where people often, to avoid taxation, they would go into the mountains, they would go into the forests to avoid the state, to avoid being taxed, to avoid being enslaved, to avoid being captured and made into slave labor. So there's some very interesting comparisons with this concept of zomia. And so this is my one point that I think James Scott, as a political scientist, hasn't understood, that I think an anthropologist can, which is that the this condition of quasi-autonomy that I think we can feel up in Russell. Yes, we're kind of abandoned, neglected, and disparaged, and in many ways not getting a good relation with the central system and representatives of Sarkar and all that kind of thing. But the one thing that James Scott, the political scientist, missed out, I think, is people's relation to the Shibda Neda, to the territorial Lalu. This is something which is also, it's very powerful sense of being to do with one's health, to do with the biodiversity, or all the contingencies of life, what might happen, disease or accident, and all this thing can be affected by relation with the Shibda Neda, with the Lalu. And I think this is the element of subjective consciousness which is missing from the political analysis of the Zomia thing. And my argument in this book is that these territorial sovereigns are the non-human. There has to be, at the full moon time, there has to be the Laben or whoever goes to the Shibda and makes offering, and because they're the Malik, aren't they? They're the landowner. They're the sovereign of the territory. The humans came later. The humans are there, and have to repeat their connection and their commitment and their observation, be respectful of the rights to the locality. Or else there can be disease, or else there can be landslide. And in the village I worked in, there was one terrible landslide which happened well before I was there, I think in the 1970s. And something like 20 people were killed in the landslide in that village. And this might be blamed on not respecting the local Shibda. I mean, I'm not saying this is obviously, it's a way of thinking, and it's a way of asking questions about our ethical relation with ecology. So the ecological ethics of care has now become an important part of thinking about climate change beyond the science. The ethics of care towards the ecology is something which is taking in far more interesting studies and research with indigenous people, and thinking also, how do women care differently from men perhaps, and what are their kind of connections. This is something which I think the research with Tamang communities can contribute a lot for understanding the ecological ethics of care. But the conservation, as it was produced through the colonial power system of the 19th century, culminating in from 1870s onwards. In the US they had the National Parks program. They pushed out the indigenous people to make nature, because nature was unqualified. You don't want humans in nature. The Yellowstone model, this was called, the Yellowstone model, from the Yellowstone National Park from the 1870s. And the park system that has been inherited by states since then has had the idea of a national park should have minimal human interference. And that's led to very severe consequences for the people that live in protected areas. Because in fact, if you leave the forest alone, if you leave nature alone, all sorts of things happen which are not all beneficial, including Banmara, will come Banmara, and other things, other stuff. It needs active management, but they've inherited this American ideology of minimal human interference, applying it in the Langtak National Park and other national parks in Nepal. And there's actually no scientific engagement in the national park. They're claiming to be founded on a scientific principle, but there is no active scientific research going on in the national park. They don't want scientific research in the national park. And the people who are running the national park, they don't know the plants, they don't know the names of the trees and the plants that are growing there. They've all come from somewhere else. The employment of local people in the national park is really, I don't know what the current figures are, but it's very, very low. I mean, there seems to be a fear of involving local people with the governance of natural environment, which is reflects ethnic political distrust. So it was in 2009 I went back to Rasua. There had been a drought. This is just ash, and I walked all the way to with two friends to Yarsa village, and we walked through a part of the burning area of the forest to see this, and the sky was like this. This actually quite accurately reflects. It was not a blue sky. It was very strange. What's the word? Uncanny. It was uncanny. But what happens? What do people talking? They talked about Shibda, and the gods had got angry. When I was there, also, yes, this very strong wind. It came and it took the roofs off the houses. We all had to go down. Somebody had a ground like room, which we could all have. About 40, 50 of us just stayed in there for about an hour while this wind came on and took the roofs away. So the idea is that, especially with that wind, that had caused anger to Shibda, and they were thinking, well, which Shibda is it? This is it? That one is it? And it was a one above Tulubarku, which is known as a very angry Shibda when he gets threatened, because the forest fire that we'd seen from before had got close to that Shibda. So this was a retribution to send the wind, because the humans had let the fire get close to the Shibda Tan. So this is a way of thinking about climate change, that it's some kind of retribution, some kind of, because we done some sin, some pap, or something that we've done gets a response like this. It's a way of thinking. It's a way of thinking, or it's a way of asking questions. And then we come here. This was a young Bombo, Tawasenam, and there had been, again, this is I think 2014, something like that, and they'd had a little bit of money from Dunche office, I think, from the Gavisa, and they'd chosen to make the path to this water source. So this is Menchu, healing water, healing spring, and this one never dries out, whatever time of year. This will always be water coming. Okay, so he's a solitary. It's not a collective ritual. He's on his own. He's come with me as well, but it's a visit to try and build a relationship, and if to treat the water as a god, in order for the water to treat him as a god in return. It's the reciprocal exchange. So this is their priority, was to connect themselves to their water god. But what does the national park think of the bombos? The threats. The humans are seen as the enemy of nature. Again, this is the old American ideology of minimal human intervention and having nature with no indigenous. You can only create nature if you kick out the indigenous people. I mean, the logic is racist, and we have to ask: is this justified? And what would it look? How could some dialogue be arrived at? I think, Nabraj, you had the dialogue was part of your remit for this talk. How could we get dialogue from that nature conservationist angle with the animist bombo, for whom nature isn't a far away exterior thing, but something which is intrinsic and is part of? And the bombo tradition also is, it includes the point of view of seeing the world from another being. And I had this interview with the old bombo from Tengu Namsa, who told me about how he was taken. He became a bombo because he was taken by Nyalmo, and they caught him. The family, they kept him for many days, and the Nyalmo had children, and the children said to their father and mother, "Oh, look, here's a human being. He has nice. Can I eat the flesh? Or can I eat the nose? Nah, yes, I'm hungry." And the parents of the Nyamo said, "No. You must only eat when we say you can eat." So they have kinship and culture. Okay, it's very important this. But from the point of another body, another being, another kind of being. And this is similar to other stories of seeing the world from the point of view of another being, which is similar in research that's been done with the shamanic people of South America especially. So it's a different kind of way of conceiving of the world and who we are, and it's an imaginative journey that people go on. What else have we got? And then let's think. I mean, when somebody dies, the cremation has to happen. So again, it's the forest and the wood and the leaves. That's the end of the human existence is made possible through a relationship with the forest and the wood and the stones. That's what we become at the end of our life, our brief times as living, breathing bodies. It's all part of the relational world. So we're getting along there. The conclusion. So the climate change. So to try and reconnect some thoughts about what Nabraj wanted me to share. The complicated ideas and to make the dialogue to shift across. I've brought in some elements which I think can help us talk about differences and dialogues, traditions and transitions, and so thinking about how some things might be considered separate, but we can think about ways of seeing them coming together. But when we come into people's lived worlds, in places like I know in Rasua, in anthropology is being aware. It's not so much knowledge as a mode of attention. how do we become available to experience what's happening in the environment around us. And this is often not in verbal, it's not linguistically articulated. There's the American, Emily Ye, I don't know where she's from originally, but she works in Colorado in the US, and she works with Tibetan pastoralists, Emily Ye. Yeah. She's written some very good things about how people's understanding of the environment and the fact that things are changed now, they're different, and the snow has gone from many of the mountains and all this kind of, it's a bodily thing, you feel it. And the people who keep the animals and the yaks or whatever, the sheep and the goats, they're experiencing things not just in linguistic ways of communicating what's happening with them. So there's an embodied sense. This is something which you might want to consider for the language project. This is slow violence. The loss of indigenous languages means that the richness of ways of expressing knowledge of environmental change and responses to environmental change and sensing the vulnerability to environmental change, all these kinds of things, with the loss of the language, that's going to be significant. Yes, the loss of language is going to be detrimental to capturing the breadth of possibilities for people to respond to climate change. But like I said just now, there's also non-verbal ways of experiencing climate change, which is difficult for scientifically minded people of climate modelers or people who want to project financial costs and benefits of climate change and all this kind of thing. That's going to be hard to communicate, but I think that's where the dialogue people need to be made aware of the richness and the different kinds of forms of knowledge, which include tacit knowledge, embodied knowledge of these kinds of things. People are innovating, they're trying to do their best, they're trying to make do with what they have, and they send their children away to the Gulf, to Qatar, Dubai, Malaysia, and then the children come back and they have to beg money for the bus to come home from the Tribhuvan airport to Rasua. They have to beg money because they haven't saved any money. So, this is a few stories I've heard of examples like this. It's not a solution to go abroad and migrate, and then others come back in an ambulance. And the cost of hiring an ambulance for bringing a dead body back to the village, these are sad. These are sad things. So the global economic route to solving problems in village agriculture and village livelihoods is not easily solved by remittance economy. So I think that's it. I think I've said most of what I can say now, so I'll be quiet. Thank you for listening. Thank you very much.